What no one tells you about this moment is that it doesn't start loud. It doesn't start dramatic. It begins in silence, your silence. The silence that was once your biggest fear, now becoming your greatest source of power. And the avoidant, who once felt so certain that you would always bend, always adjust, always shrink just to keep the connection alive, suddenly feels something they never expected, the weight of losing a version of you they thought they'd have forever. When an avoidant sees that your self-respect has grown stronger than their ego, everything inside them shifts. You become something they can't easily categorize anymore. You're no longer the person who over-explains your heart, who tries to prove your worth, who waits for breadcrumbs disguised as effort. You're no longer the one who apologizes for wanting emotional closeness or connection. Instead, you stand in a place they never imagined you would reach, your own emotional center. A place they can't control, can't predict, and can't manipulate. And this is where their internal world starts to crack. Because avoidants never prepare for the day you stop trying. They expect distance to push you toward them. They expect silence to make you chase. They expect inconsistency to make you work harder. But when you choose yourself instead of clinging to them, it disrupts the entire emotional rhythm they're used to. It's like you suddenly switched off the music in a room they thought only they controlled. This is where the story begins, not with them pulling away, but with you pulling inward. With you finally realizing that your worth is not measured by someone's inability to receive it. Your heart becomes yours again, and your energy stops pouring into a black hole of avoidance. You become your own anchor, and the avoidant senses it instantly, even if they never admit it. They feel the difference in the air. They feel the loss of emotional power. They feel something they've always been afraid to feel, the awareness that they are no longer the center of your emotional world. And even though avoidance may look detached on the surface, inside them, something starts to unravel the moment they feel you reclaim yourself. It's not dramatic, it's not obvious, but it is powerful. It's the moment they realize your self-respect is rising faster than their defenses can keep up with. Because your self-respect isn't just about walking away. It's about shifting the frequency of your presence. It's the calmness in your tone, the pause before you respond, the absence of desperation, the emotional independence in your eyes, and the avoidant feels it, and for the first time it's not something they can ignore. It's the moment their ego no longer feels like the strongest force in the room. Everything changed because something changed in you, and it wasn't anger, it was clarity. You didn't become cold, you didn't become detached, you simply stopped abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And this subtle transformation is exactly what an avoidant never expects, because avoidants rely on patterns. They depend on your predictability. They depend on the version of you that overextends your heart to compensate for their fear of closeness. But something shifted inside you. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a sudden burst of self-realization. Maybe it was finally asking yourself, why am I trying to prove that I'm worthy to someone who is afraid to receive what I offer? Whatever the moment was, it changed everything, and the avoidant feels that change before you even speak it. Your energy no longer reaches for them. Your eyes no longer search for reassurance. Your voice no longer tries to soften their discomfort. You stop walking on the emotional eggshells they created. You stop explaining what should be understood. You stop chasing a connection that doesn't chase you back. And that shift is louder to an avoidant than any argument, because you become unpredictable, you become uncontainable, you become someone they can no longer depend on to make their emotional fear feel safe. And suddenly the avoidant has to deal with the one thing they've tried their whole life to avoid: responsibility. Emotional responsibility. The responsibility of either stepping up or watching someone truly valuable step away. And here's the irony. When you start respecting yourself, the avoidant sees you more clearly. They see your strength. They see your worth. They see the emotional balance you've always had, but they were too defended to appreciate it. And they also see everything they risk losing. Not through your words, not through your threats, but through your silence, through your boundaries, through your emotional independence. Self-respect looks incredibly attractive to an avoidant, even though it scares them. Because they see something in you they wish they had within themselves: stability, courage, emotional openness combined with strength. They see someone who is capable of connection, but not at the cost of self-betrayal. And that's when something inside them begins to shift. Avoidants never admit this, but they subconsciously depend on the other person having weaker boundaries, not because they want to hurt anyone, but because they feel safer when they are emotionally needed. If you constantly seek reassurance, they feel less pressure. If you overgive, they feel less responsible. If you tolerate distance, they feel less guilt. Their ego thrives when they know you won't leave. But when your self-respect becomes stronger than their ego, everything collapses. They suddenly lose that sense of certainty. Their emotional structure becomes unstable because the system they depended on no longer works. It's like the rug is pulled from under their feet. They feel it immediately, your energy no longer clinging to them, no longer anxiously waiting for their crumbs of connection. Avoidants expect you to remain emotionally predictable. They expect you to abandon your needs for theirs. But when you stop doing that, their internal world becomes uncomfortable. You were the emotional cushion that made their distance feel justified. You were the giver, the peacemaker, the heart that kept the connection from dying. They depended on that more than you realize. And now they don't have it. Your self-respect forces them to confront their own emotional immaturity. It highlights the imbalance of effort, it exposes the truth behind their detachment, and most importantly, it makes them uncomfortable in a way that leads to self-reflection. Not because they want to change, but because they can't deny the loss of control. The moment you stop chasing an avoidant is the moment they feel the shock. It hits them quietly, but deeply. They're not used to it. They're not prepared for it. They don't know how to handle it. They look for the old version of you, the one who tried harder, loved louder, held on to hope tighter. But that version of you is gone. And what they feel next is unfamiliar. A sense of emotional imbalance, a sense that something important is slipping, a sense that the connection they once took for granted is no longer guaranteed. Fear, confusion, curiosity, all of it begins to surface, even if they don't show it. And that shock forces them to look at you again, not as someone who will always be there, but as someone who might not be. That is the moment your self-respect becomes more powerful than their ego. It's the moment they realize they miscalculated your strength. They underestimated your worth. They believed their distance would keep them safe, but instead, it cost them their emotional leverage. And that realization is something they will never fully admit, but will always feel. What happens in the avoidance mind when your self-respect rises above their ego is silent, but powerful. They feel an internal shift that unsettles them, because for the first time, they aren't the one in control. The dynamic they created to keep you at a safe distance no longer works. Their emotional strategies, pulling away, shutting down, ignoring, minimizing, lose their power over you. Your energy no longer responds to their ego. And when an avoidant realizes that, something inside them breaks open. They feel a sense of loss before they lose you. They feel fear before they can name it. They feel admiration before they can accept it. They feel drawn to you while fighting the urge to retreat. It's the moment they see the truth. You were never the dependent one. You were the courageous one. You were the emotionally strong one. You were the one willing to grow. And now you become the one they fear losing the most. What you need to understand now is that the emotional unraveling inside an avoidant never looks dramatic on the outside. They don't collapse, they don't cry, they don't confess, they don't suddenly reach out with clarity. Their world moves differently, quietly, internally, behind the walls they've built their whole life. But when they feel your self-respect rising higher than their ego, something inside them begins to crack open in ways they don't even know how to articulate. It starts as a discomfort, a heaviness, a strange sense of unease that they can't explain, and they'll tell themselves it's nothing, just stress, just a long day, just exhaustion. But it's not. It's the beginning of a quiet emotional panic, because they sense that your energy is no longer orbiting around them. They feel the void where your emotional availability used to be. They feel the absence of your reassurance. They feel the disappearance of your automatic forgiveness. This is the silent panic nobody sees. Avoidants have spent their entire lives controlling closeness and distance, pulling when they feel safe, and retreating when they feel overwhelmed. It's a consistent internal rhythm they rely on to protect themselves from emotional vulnerability. But when you stop chasing, stop filling the emotional gap, stop acting like a backup generator for their fear, the rhythm breaks, their shield fails, their ego loses power, and that's when the panic sets in. It's not the fear of losing you yet, it's the fear of losing the version of you they depended on, the version that gave them comfort without demanding accountability, that accepted the scraps they offered, that made connection easy because you carried all the emotional weight, but now you've shifted into someone they can't predict, can't manage, and can't emotionally control through distance. Inside them something whispers, what if they're really done? What if they don't need me anymore? What if I misjudged them? What if I pushed too far? They won't say these things out loud. They'll continue to act calm, detached, unfazed, but inside the emotional truth grows louder. They feel the distance you created, and unlike before, it wasn't caused by their fear, it was caused by your self-worth, and that terrifies them in a way they never expected. Avoidants are rarely confronted with their own patterns. People either chase them harder or give up in silence, but you didn't give up, you grew. Your growth reflects everything they've avoided within themselves. It holds up a mirror they don't want to look into. When they feel your self-respect rising, it forces them to see what their ego has been protecting them from for years, their own emotional inadequacy, their fear of vulnerability, their fear of true intimacy, their inability to meet someone at the depth they desire but are terrified to show. Your silence becomes a mirror, your boundaries become a mirror, your emotional maturity becomes a mirror, and it reflects the truth they've tried to run from. They didn't lose control, they lost the version of you they relied on to avoid growing. That moment is not just uncomfortable, it's transformative, because it puts them face to face with the consequences of their emotional avoidance. For the first time they must ask themselves, why did I act like this? Why do I push away the very person who sees me? Why do I retreat from closeness that feels safe? Why do I sabotage connections that could heal me? Your self-respect triggers their self-reflection, not because they want to change, but because they can no longer deny the emotional impact of their behavior. Their old ego-driven reflexes don't work anymore, forcing them to examine themselves more deeply than they ever have before. It's the moment their patterns collide with your boundaries, and in that collision, something inside them shifts. They begin to sense a new dynamic forming, whether they admit it or not. The emotional power they once held over the connection dissolves, not because you forced it, but because you reclaimed yourself. Avoidants thrive in imbalance, instinctively feeling safer when someone else is more emotionally invested, but when that imbalance disappears, their confidence falters. They look at you differently now, not as the person who used to hold the emotional weight, but as someone who stands tall on their own. They feel something unfamiliar, respect, real, deep, undeniable respect. Because avoidance respects strength, boundaries, someone who can walk away, someone who doesn't bend to their emotional fear, someone they can't predict. Suddenly, they see you not as the one who needs them, but as someone they might lose if they don't step up. That realization breaks the illusion of their ego, the comfort of their distance, and the narrative they've told themselves to justify pulling away. Their ego says, I'm safer alone. Your self-respect says, you'll lose me if you keep hiding. That difference becomes impossible for them to ignore. They start watching you more closely, noticing things they never paid attention to before, your calmness, independence, and the way you no longer emotionally react to their inconsistency. Slowly, the power dynamic shifts. The connection no longer revolves around their fear, it revolves around your strength. That shift makes them start questioning their own emotional choices. The moment your absence becomes louder than your presence is one of the most powerful emotional experiences an avoidant will ever encounter, not because you're gone, but because you're no longer energetically tied to them. Avoidants don't feel your absence immediately when you walk away. They feel it when you stop needing them emotionally, stop waiting for their emotional breadcrumbs, stop being affected by their distance. That's when the silence hits them in a way they can't escape. Your absence becomes a signal that something about you has changed, that you're no longer emotionally dependent, that they have underestimated your resilience, that they've lost the emotional safety net they never appreciated. Avoidants don't miss your presence, they miss the version of you that gave without limits. When that version disappears, they feel it like a cold wind moving through a room they thought would never change. This is when their mind becomes restless. They start replaying moments, wondering if they pushed too far, questioning what you're thinking, feeling, doing. Your silence becomes a story they can't stop reading, even though it has no words. Slowly, the absence you created becomes louder than the love you once offered. Because your absence isn't empty, it's filled with your self-respect, your boundaries, your growth, everything they never expected you to build. For the first time, the avoidant is left wondering. They realize they can no longer manipulate the dynamic. Their old patterns no longer give them emotional advantage. The silence that used to protect their ego now exposes their fears. The distance that used to keep them safe now threatens their connection to you. The emotional indifference they used to display now feels like a risk they didn't calculate. They realize they can no longer move the dynamic with avoidance, dictate closeness by withdrawing, create emotional imbalance with silence, or hide behind "I don't care," because you stopped playing the role that made their ego feel comfortable. When they sense this shift, their mind enters an unfamiliar space, a space where they aren't calling the emotional shots, where the person they pushed away now stands stronger than before, where they realize they've lost their influence over the connection. And this realization doesn't inflate their ego, it crushes it. What's fascinating is how the avoidant begins to see you during this phase. There's a softness in the way they watch you now, a curiosity that wasn't there before, a respect that grows quietly inside them. They never expected you to be the one who breaks the emotional pattern first. They always assumed they were the one who would detach before you did. They assumed they would be the one who moves on first. They assumed they would be the one who cared less. But the truth becomes unavoidable. You are stronger than their ego, more grounded than their fear, more self-aware than their defenses, and more emotionally mature than their avoidance. That stirs something deep inside them, something that looks like regret, but feels like admiration. They start seeing sides of you they were blind to before, the sides they never slowed down long enough to appreciate, the sides they now feel drawn to because they finally understand something. You were never too much. You were exactly what they always needed, and exactly what their fear refused to accept. This is where an avoidant begins to reevaluate you in a way they've never done before. Not because you begged, chased, or tried to convince them of your worth, but because you stopped trying. That lack of pressure creates space for their real feelings to surface. They start noticing your independence, your emotional clarity, your new sense of peace, your refusal to overextend, your calm detachment, and your quiet strength. It forces them to see you differently, not as the person who used to hold on, but as the person who knows exactly who they are now. It's the return of respect, respect they should have given you earlier, respect they now feel without needing you to earn it, respect that doesn't come from fear or loss, but from truth. Deep down, even avoidance craves someone who can love deeply without losing themselves, and now they see that you are exactly that. This is the point where avoidance begin to re-enter your life, slowly, subtly, cautiously, not with grand gestures or emotional confessions, but in ways that reflect both their fear and their longing. They won't say, "I miss you," "I was wrong," or "I'm scared of losing you." Instead, they start with the smallest moves, a random text at a strange time, a question that doesn't need an answer, a like on a post they never used to interact with, an indirect message on social media, a sudden reminder of something you once talked about, or a check-in disguised as casual conversation. These gestures may seem small, but to an avoidant, they are monumental. It means they are thinking about you. The distance is no longer comfortable. Their silence is no longer a shield. It's a prison. Reaching out becomes their way of cracking the armor they once relied on. They won't make it obvious, smooth, or confident, because avoidants don't know how to re-enter gracefully. They re-enter through hesitation, curiosity, fear of being ignored, and longing they don't know how to name. What matters is why they try to re-enter, not the method. The reason is simple. Your self-respect didn't push them away. It pulled them into awareness. It made them see where they stood, realize what they lost, and feel something they weren't prepared for. It made them come back, not because they need your validation, but because they need your presence, even if they don't say it. One of the most powerful emotional reactions inside an avoidant happens when they see you move forward without them. Witness your energy rise, your confidence stabilize, your emotional glow up, and realize your world didn't collapse without them. In fact, it improved. That's when jealousy strikes. Avoidants feel jealousy more intensely than they will ever admit, not the jealousy of possession, but the jealousy of awareness, awareness that you're becoming someone they might not be able to reach again, that you could give your emotional depth to someone else, that someone else might get the version of you they were too afraid to hold on to. This jealousy is quiet, internal, and deeply revealing. It's the moment they wonder, are they happier now? Do they miss me? Has someone else seen what I didn't see? What if someone else values them the way I couldn't? That question becomes their emotional earthquake, because avoidants don't fear intimacy, they fear losing control of intimacy. They don't fear closeness, they fear being replaced by someone who can handle closeness. Your self-respect puts them face to face with their biggest insecurity. They weren't afraid of your love, they were afraid they wouldn't be enough for it. Now that you've chosen yourself, the avoidant realizes something painful but true. You are not waiting for them, you are healing from them. Jealousy becomes the emotional signal they can't hide from anymore. Your transformation, the strength, the boundaries, the clarity, becomes an emotional mirror they can't escape. It shows them what you always offered with open hands: loyalty, compassion, consistency, depth, connection. But now it reflects something else too: your courage to walk away from what wasn't valuing you. This mirror forces them to see themselves in a way they've avoided for years. It reflects the truth they never wanted to confront. They didn't lose you because you weren't enough. They lost you because they weren't willing to grow. This realization breaks through their emotional defenses in a way nothing else can. For the first time, they see the cost of their avoidance, not in theory, not in fear, but in reality. They see the love you gave, the effort you carried, the patience you offered, the understanding you provided, the emotional space you created, and the version of them you believed in. Then they see what their patterns did to all of that. It's not guilt that hits them, it's awareness. Awareness of the gap between who they were and who they needed to be. Awareness of the emotional weight you carried alone. Awareness of the connection they never fully stepped into. Your transformation exposes the parts of themselves they've kept hidden under layers of fear. For the first time, they can't hide from the truth. You didn't abandon them, they abandoned the connection, and you simply chose yourself afterward. What happens now is the part of the journey where everything becomes undeniably clear. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply, silently transformative. When your self-respect becomes your compass, you stop bending your boundaries just to make someone else comfortable. You stop shrinking to avoid conflict. You stop betraying your needs to maintain a fragile peace. This shift becomes the new foundation of your life. Your boundaries are no longer threats or ultimatums. They are the natural expression of someone who knows their value. This is something avoidants aren't used to, not because they don't understand boundaries, but because they've rarely met someone who enforced them with compassion, not anger, strength, not insecurity, calmness, not fear. You don't set boundaries to punish them, you set boundaries to protect yourself, and that difference is powerful. Your boundaries become a silent declaration of self-worth, a declaration the avoidant feels more deeply than you think. Healthy, consistent boundaries reveal the emotional gap between who they are and who they want to be. You didn't change the dynamic with threats or drama, you changed it by choosing yourself, and the avoidant sees this, feels it, recognizes it, and is affected by it. Your boundaries shift the entire emotional ecosystem between you. Where there was once imbalance, there is now clarity. Where there was once dependency, there is now autonomy. Where there was once emotional chaos, there is now structure. This forces the avoidant to confront the truth. They can no longer hide behind the excuses that kept intimacy at arm's length. Your boundaries make them realize they must either show up differently or lose you completely. This is when the avoidant reaches a crossroads. What you've triggered inside them, without forcing anything, is a moment of truth, a moment where they must decide whether to grow or retreat. It's not an easy choice for them, not because they don't care, but because emotional growth means facing everything they've avoided their entire life. They feel the weight of the distance now, the loss of the connection you once held together, the consequence of their patterns not in theory but in reality. This is where their ego is no longer running the show, where their fear is no longer the only voice guiding them, where they sense that if they don't evolve, they will lose someone irreplaceable, and that awareness changes everything. Some avoidants try to grow, some begin to self-reflect, some take responsibility, some start to become emotionally present. They begin to notice the way they pull away, question their instinct to withdraw, acknowledge how they sabotage closeness, and confront the fear they've been running from. This doesn't mean they suddenly become secure overnight, but it means your self-respect has become the catalyst for their awakening. Sometimes it takes losing the emotional comfort of someone who truly cared to realize how deeply they need to face themselves. Whether they grow or retreat, that is their journey, but what matters most is that your transformation gave them no place to hide from their own truth anymore. What's surprising to many is how secure energy affects an avoidant. Avoidants don't run from love, they run from pressure, expectations, emotional chaos, and the fear of being consumed. Secure energy is none of those things. It's calm, steady, grounded, open without being overwhelming, loving without being demanding. That's what you've grown into. You are no longer the anxious giver, no longer the emotional caretaker, no longer the person who tries to save the connection by sacrificing your peace. You've become secure within yourself, and this changes the way the avoidant views you entirely. Secure energy doesn't chase, it invites. Secure energy doesn't beg, it respects. Secure energy doesn't collapse, it stands. When an avoidant feels this from you, their fear doesn't spike, it settles. For the first time, you become predictable in the ways that matter, and unpredictable in the ways that awaken their curiosity. Predictable in your self-worth, unpredictable in your reactions, predictable in your emotional stability, unpredictable in your willingness to walk away. Secure energy is what finally makes them feel safe enough to inch forward. Your grounded presence does something their ego never could. It makes closeness feel less threatening. They sense they can approach without being swallowed, express without being judged, open without being controlled, and be imperfect without being shamed. You become the safest emotional space they've ever encountered, not because you lack boundaries, but because your boundaries come with warmth instead of fear. This is the moment where the emotional power, quietly, naturally returns to you, not in a way that makes you superior or dominant, but because you operate from clarity rather than fear. You move from self-worth instead of longing. You know you can stay or walk away with equal strength. The avoidant senses this shift at a soul-deep level. Your self-respect gives you emotional control. Your boundaries give you emotional freedom. Your confidence gives you emotional independence. And your new calmness makes you unpredictable in the most powerful way. They realize they can't push you away with distance anymore, can't pull you back with crumbs, can't lean on your unconditional giving, and can't rely on your old patterns. You decide now, you choose, your heart is no longer in their hands, it's in yours. This changes everything, how they approach you, think about you, regret the past, imagine the future, and show up now. Whether they move closer or stay distant, one truth becomes undeniable: you no longer lose yourself to keep them. That is where your power returns, not through force, but through self-love. The final moment in this journey, the one that completes the transformation, is when you realize the truth that was always meant to find you. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. You were never unworthy of emotional closeness. You were giving it to someone who didn't know how to receive it. You were never weak for loving deeply. You were strong for continuing to open your heart. Now, with your self-respect stronger than their ego, you stand in a place of emotional freedom, a place where you understand something powerful. Their fear was never your responsibility to fix, their avoidance was never your burden to carry, and their emotional distance was never a reflection of your worth. Your strength disrupted their patterns, your boundaries awakened their awareness, your growth forced them to see themselves, and your self-respect made you untouchable in all the ways that matter. For the first time, the avoidant faces a truth they can't escape. You weren't just someone in their life, you were the turning point. Whether they grow enough to meet you, or their fear keeps them from you, your journey continues. Your strength follows you, your self-respect protects you, and your heart is now yours again. That is the ending, the beginning, and the transformation all in one.